Peace, how's everyone doing? Welcome to another episode of Music Industry. My name is Aquil. This is my vlog, video log, blog, all the above. Promoting my up-and-coming project, Traveling in Life. Also just speaking on mass media, marketing, entertainment, music, our culture, and the like. So the topic of this show is a little bit different, and it is a DNA reveal, which I've done years ago, but I feel like I'm going to put it into this video to make use of it, and also debating the Africanness or the Blackness of ancient Egypt. If you have been under a rock over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of hoopla about the Netflix show or series or documentary about Cleopatra, and I think there were like 7 or 17 Cleopatras. So people were pretty much upset in Egypt that Cleopatra was depicted as a black woman or a biracial woman who is phenotypically clearly of African ancestry. So I'm not going to get into that whole, proving, looking at the pictures, looking at the monuments, looking at the artifacts that the ancient Kemetic or Egyptian or people of Timeri left behind, or the Happy Valley, which is Nile Valley, left behind, because it's evident, it's clear. And plus there's several million videos that you can find all over online, and books that you can find, and artifacts that you can find to prove the Africanness, the Blackness, the originalness of the Nile Valley, ancient Kemetic, happy civilizations. So I'm not going to do that. What this show is primarily about is tying us into those places, because a lot of people will say, well, you have no connection to those places, you're from West Africa. And some people even have debate on us being from Africa at all. We have this whole confusion, I would say, about us being always in the States or in the West, in Americas, and not being from Africa, even though we have so much proof of the contrary. And that's what my show is going to be about. Just
I'm from Africa. I'm from Crenshaw Mafia.
Proving, I don't know about you, because they say we're not a monolith, but as far as I'm concerned, as far as my research has shown, we are clearly African. We are clearly from the continent, and we have birthright claim to all over the continent primarily. And I'm just going to show you my DNA evidence as proof of that. And before I go any further, let me just say that now I know that DNA is not 100% proof, but we also have all kinds of cultural and historical facts and data and information that we can get into. And for the sake of not making this video too long, I'm just going to dibble and dabble and give you places you can go and links you can find to find more information. I also want to say, I think that this whole confusion on identity is a psyop. I think that is a program to keep us confused and off kilter, to keep us without any kind of stability or foundation, as some of these phony people like to claim, because there is no foundation for us so-called Black Americans. There is no ADOS. There is no, we were never really American, if you want to get technical about it. And even there's a loophole in the 13th Amendment that shows that. So without getting too far into that politics, I'm just going to go off and show my evidence for showing that we have connections to all these ancient civilizations, that we can claim birthright to them, or I can claim birthright to them. And I'm no different than you, because we are pretty much the same people. We come from the same places, share the same culture, commonality, even if we don't have the same ideology or information or wisdom or knowledge. Now, why is the Blackness of ancient Egypt even debated? And that's what I would like to get into before I get into the DNA reveal. The Blackness of ancient Egypt, or Kemet or Timeri, is debated because Europeans, when they created Egyptology, or right before they created Egyptology, when the French and the British were there, they stumbled across these giant African monuments and saw these African faces, and simultaneously were colonizing or trying to colonize Africa, engaging in the transatlantic slave trade, such as the French and the British, who organized and massively profited off of it, even to this day, where the French and the British profit off of post-colonization and pretty much pillaging the resources and the currencies in Western Africa primarily. But they had to justify those things by saying African people were inferior, and that myth is still promoted 24/7, 365, to the point our people have internalized it, and they only think they're good at sports and entertainment and music and so on and so forth, not seeing themselves as intellectually able to challenge anybody that's in opposition to them, primarily Western or Eurasian societies. So the blackness had to be debated, because you can't claim you're superior when everything that you stand on was stolen, grafted, and a bad, terrible carbon copy of something that was made 6,000 years ago by these African people in the Nile Valley. You just can't. That's insanity, and it's insanity to even debate the blackness. That's why I'm not getting into it. Now, I commend people that do that, and that's all well and good. I'm not saying that they're insane. I'm saying that it's insane to debate the Africanness of that civilization, and even, you know, entertain these people. It was black. And I'm going to show you a picture. I was there in the year 2000, at the age of 15. I saw people there that looked like my relatives, especially in the lower part of lower part of Nile Valley, near Aswan. But I would say Luxor and South, people start looking like us. And they're still there. They call them Nubians, but these are the original people. This is where the original culture comes from. This is where most of the main cities were, where all the older dynasties established themselves at, and the kings were buried. And even some of the middle and new kingdom were buried at. So I say all that to say, debating the blackness is frivolous. It's only debated because, and quote unquote debated, because Eurasians have a massive guilt trip and have to justify the transatlantic slave trade, the perpetual mistreatment of African people globally, on the continent of Africa, in the diaspora, so on and so forth. And the whole world has jumped on this myth of African or original inferiority, and derode the myth of white supremacy. I call it deriding the myth of white supremacy. So I'm not going to get into the blackness of ancient Kemet. We were there. I was there. I seen the people. There's still African there. So that's that. So tools that I used one DNA site primarily. I did it, I want to say in the year 2018. I used Ancestry DNA, and from there I plugged my information into GEDmatch, then into Family Tree DNA, and then into Living DNA most recently, because it is said to have a little more specificity when it comes to the different cultural groups that we come from, especially as African people. And you find that the test with Ancestry is very generic as far as the regions. They're very large regions, and we know these countries weren't there when our people were stolen roughly 250, 300 years ago, so on and so forth. So before I get into the DNA test, people will say, oh, well, you can't trust these DNA tests, they're not real. And I'm not saying that these DNA tests are 100% accurate. I'm just saying in my case, number one, I already knew where my great grandparents were from on both sides. I knew exact town they were from, the exact area they were from, and the test came up accurate in pinpointing the exact area they were from. I knew the names that they had. People will also say, well, these tests aren't accurate, and they'll cite African ancestry DNA because it only traces the maternal and paternal lineages, the Y DNA paternal and the mitochondrial DNA maternal. So they'll say, oh, it's not accurate because it only gave me 1% of my DNA, not the autosomal DNA. And they're conflating two things. African ancestry is to trace your mother's mother and your father's father. It doesn't give you a big picture of your genetic information. Only your Y lineage if you're a male, and your X lineage if you're a male or female. And before I even get into the DNA, let me first say that people say, oh, you try to claim ancient Egypt, you don't have anything else to claim. We could claim all the West African empires, from Benin, from the Bamoun, from the Kanu Bornu, to, we could claim Congo and Angola. We could claim the medieval empires, Songhai, Mali, Ghana. We can claim all the way back to the Nok civilization. I mean, there's so many places we could claim in Western Africa that we don't have to sit here in civilization still, as they say. I mean, we are connected to most of these groups. In fact, when Eurasians came, they were attracted to Africa because of the legendary gold and information that West Africa had. Do not get it twisted. West Africa was the financial and intellectual center of the world prior to the transatlantic slave trade. That's what attracted Europeans there. The gold that they had, and still the most gold, is extracted from the ground in present-day Ghana, which was named after the Ghana Empire that was a little bit further north in what is now present-day Burkina Faso, Mali area. So saying all that to say, we always had skills. We always had talent. We were thriving. And not to say people weren't struggling, because I'm pretty sure there was classism, there was a form of slavery there was a form of servitude there. But the economic and intellectual center of the world were Western African places, empires, Mali, Ghana, Songhai, and that's what initially attracted the Eurasians. Then they would realize how people poor Europe was because of the plagues, because of the wars, because of just the massive incompetence and the unsanitary conditions in Europe, and they needed people to pretty much operate the land in the new places they were finding. And since they couldn't use the indigenous people, since they knew the land, knew the land, so they couldn't colonize them and take them, and also they were dying because of their diseases that they weren't able to fend off. They stole Africans who were the strongest, who were the most able physically and able to endure the conditions as far as the heat, especially towards the equator and in the southern areas or areas close to the equator. So I say all to say, this whole thing about us not having anything else to claim, please stop it. Western Africa has a history that rivals anywhere in the world. And in fact, I always say that if Game of Thrones is as legendary as it is, you can chronicle the history of Western Africa from Mali to Songhai, and it would be greater than any Game of Thrones show ever, the first seasons, and that's without the dragons. Without the dragons, I mean, it would put any novel to shame. I mean, you got all the tales, the backbiting, the family infighting, which caused a lot of the empires to fall, the treachery, but also the greatness, the glory, the gold, the wars, the intellectual abilities. And we can even tap into the Moors, because a lot of the Moorish armies and generals and even rulers were from Western Africa. A lot of the Almoravids were from Western Africa. So I say all to say, we don't have to steal anybody's anything. People always have to steal from us. We don't have to impose on anybody. People always take our stuff, remix it, and they claim it's not ours. But without going on a tangent, let's get into the DNA. So the first test I took, and it has changed since I've taken it in 2018 to say to get more information, a bigger sample. And I take the estimations with a grain of salt. And the reason why is because they change regions, they get a bigger sample of populations, and these are approximations. I always look at if I could find distant cousins from a lot of these regions, and I found distant cousins from Gambia to Kenya. So that goes to show you that, you know, even if these numbers are accurate, I'm finding actual people. And I actually met a distant cousin. I'll get into that story real quick. We'll be getting to the other DNA tests. So on Ancestry, it shows 29% Nigerian, 19% Ivory Coast, Ghana, 15% Cameroon, Congo, 11% Benin, Mali, 10% Benin, Togo, 3% Senegal, 3% Sweden, Denmark. We ain't gonna skip over the Eurasian places. 1% Southern Bantu peoples, and 1% Sardinia. That's interesting. I think that Sardinia might be some noise that might be actually from North Africa. And I say that because the people in Sardinia were highly mixed with the people from North Africa who were African, some Moors, some Arabs, but they were highly mixed with the people, even the people in southern Italy and southern Spain, which is why they're so swarthy and dark-haired now, is because they were mixing with the people from Northern Africa. But not to go into a tangent, so it's roughly 88% African, 12% Eurasian. Now, when I went to Ghana in 2019, I went twice. I went in May with a good friend, Yazilla. Now, I didn't expect to meet up with anyone, but I found multiple cousins on Ancestry tests from mainly Nigeria, but also Ghana, primarily Igbo, one at BBO, one Yoruba, also from Ghana, Ewe or Ewe, Ga, Akan, and Fanti, right? So I stayed there for, I want to say, 10 days. We went to the multiple dungeons, slave castles as they call them, or castles, but they're really dungeons where they transported the Africans from those places to the Americas. There are 75 forts along the coast, so that shows you that there was a massive operation of transporting people, and they were coming from all over. They were coming from thousands of miles away, marching towards the coast. But I didn't expect to meet anyone there that was a distant relative. I did another DNA test. This is when I put my information into GEDmatch, and I found a distant cousin that was Ga and in Accra, right? So I plan to meet up with him, and I actually got a chance to meet him, and you'll see the picture right here. I never expected to meet anyone that was a distant relative. He was guy, and ironically, his first name, which I will not say, is the name of one of my grandfather, actually, and my great grandfather. So he had the same name, and his grandfather had that name as well. So it was interesting. But I also go on to say that when I was in Cape Coast, I felt something on my back real quick. They asked me to take a picture in front of the door, no return, and I couldn't do it. It was like a spiritual thing. It was like something was heavy on my back. I heard like 1,000 people whispering at the same time. That's what it felt like in my ears. And then I just felt something heavy on me. A tear came down my eye. I wasn't sobbing, but it was like a tear came down my eye. And then all of a sudden, like this weight just came off me. And I was good. But it was a very ominous day. It was a very ominous feeling. It was birds flying around. It was very cloudy. It was heavy. It was a heavy moment. And I knew these stories. I felt something when I went to the Christianborg dungeon as well, and even Elmina. But at Cape Coast, I felt something. Now, I say all that to say, the very same day, we stayed right next to the Cape Coast dungeon, and I just happened to look on Ancestry, and I found a cousin. That's when I found my god cousin. A few months later, I found a cousin from that area that was a Khan and Fanti that currently lived in the UK. And when I'm looking at the people there, I'm like, yo, these people look just like my mom's side. And sure enough, when the ancestry test updated, it showed that my mom's side is where most of the people that were in Ghana came from. And I showed them pictures of my mother, and they're like, oh, your mom looks Ga. She looks Ewe or Eve. They were like, yeah, your mom looks like she's from here. So I'm saying all that to say that it verified what my eyes see, and people call it look at shit, but people know, like, and that's another thing. Side note, I want to say the year was 2016. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, in Decatur at the time of 2017. I was living in Decatur. I was doing Uber, and I picked up an older man not too far from where I lived at in Decatur. He started speaking a language to me that I didn't understand. Now, I took Yoruba classes in college, and I still know a little bit of it as far as hello and goodbye, and thank you, but I didn't understand what he was speaking. So this man was like, he was speaking to me, and I was like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Then he just covered his mouth, and he said, oh, I thought you were Igbo, right? So I was like, wow, I don't think I'm Igbo as far as I know. And then I started thinking about, man, I really don't know where my people come from. Let me research. And that's what spurred me to do the DNA test. Now, mind you, I started thinking about a lot of the Igbo people that I know, they blend right in with us, like as far as African Americans, so-called African Americans. Like if they didn't say their name, they would look just like us. I mean, they look just like us because we are literally direct cousins. And that also correlates into a lot of the statistics and the research that has found that the Igbo who were stolen last and shipped to the Americas and to pretty much boost up the population were one of the last populations taken. It also correlates with as far as the British and the English having relationships with what is current day Nigeria, so they are able to ship to those European colonies. And we see the similarities all day. You go to Nigeria right now, you'll blend right in. So that's just a side note. Well, not really a side note, but a part of the story that helped spur me to do a DNA test. So again, I'm just reiterating that Ancestry DNA was very accurate. I even found family that I knew was family, or relatives that I knew were relatives, as far as cousins and aunts, on the site, and their information was very accurate. It gave me my yearbook picture, which I didn't upload online. I don't know who uploaded it, but I found my yearbook picture. It had a lot of information as far as birth records and death certificates that I found. I was able to trace back and really get into my lineage. So records wise, DNA wise, it was on point. Now going into the next test, I used my family tree DNA, and when I used my family tree DNA, I found somewhat similar results to what I found on Ancestry DNA. Now on Family Tree DNA, it said I was 88% African, and if you look at the graphic, it says 34% Nigeria, 30% Ghana, Togo, Benin, 12% Senegambia, Guinea-Bissau, 4% Ivory Coast, Liberia, less than 1% Guinea, Sierra Leone, 4% Southern Congo Basin, less than 3% East Africa, primarily Eastern Lake Victoria Basin and Western Lake Victoria Basin, 12% Eurasian, and less than 1% North African, Maghreb, or Egypt. Now, keep that in mind a little bit later because I'm going to show you multiple tests. So that's my family tree DNA. And also, I want to say on my family tree, I found a distant cousin that was in Brazil. And I'm pretty sure that we all have relatives that are all along the diaspora, because I knew some of my family came from the Bahamas, and I come to find out that they came from Haiti. I also know that some of them also came from Jamaica as well and moved to the Bahamas. So I say all that to say that I'm pretty sure we all have cousins in the diaspora because a lot of our people were taken from the same places and dropped off along those routes. So the next site that I used was JabMatch. Now on JabMatch, there's a lot of tools you can use. I'm not saying they're all 100% accurate, but I use JabMatch because it has a large database. It also connects a lot of people from different sites such as 23andMe and things like that, and they all put the information in there, so you have more of a reach to find different people. I found Ibibio, distant relative, on that site that lived in Atlanta, Georgia, ironically, at the same time I did. I also found a guy, distant relative, and an Igbo distant relative. There was an African royalty DNA project that was done, and I found several relatives that were of noble, lineage and currently living on the continent, so-called chiefs. And that term chief was used to downplay the nobility, the monarchies in Africa. These were kings and queens, and I hate when black folks say we was kings in the derogatory term. I want to punch you in the mouth, because that's what Eurasians use to downplay our political institutions and our culture institutions and things like that. So with that said, I used JabMatch, and the first test I used was EthioHelix. Now I use EthioHelix because it's good for people to have African ancestry, but also ancestry that is admixed with Eurasian ancestry, and they use French as an approximation for all the European ancestry. I plug my DNA into there, right? And you can break it down by chromosomes, so you can look and see how much each ancestry comes down to the chromosome. And before I get into that, it has it broken down into Nilo-Saharan came up, North Africa came up, Mbuti, Pygmy, and Pygmy is a bad term, Twa, Eastern Bantu, Khoi, San, and people always say the Khoi and San people look Asian. Wrong. Asian people look Khoi and San because the Khoi San people are the original people. West Africa, obviously, Biaka, so-called Pygmy, Twa, and French is approximation for Eurasians or Europeans. So when we get into it even deeper and we break it down by DNA, this is where it gets real freaky at, right? So on almost every DNA strand, Nilo-Saharan comes up, and it even comes up significantly towards the end, almost 29%. So I'm just showing you, West Africa is primary, yes. Then East Africa comes up primarily, almost every DNA strand, and it almost, in some strands, it's more than the West African strand, or it's almost a match. So East African or Eastern Bantu comes up. You see North Africa on strands. Of course, you see the French is approximation for Eurasian, and a lot of that was due to the how our ancestry was taken advantage of, sadly, and some of it was due to voluntary mixing, but a lot of it was due to involuntary taking advantage of the women and impregnating them to create more enslaved Africans, or mixed so-called Creole class people that could be a buffer class between the Africans and the Eurasians to cause more confusion. So, in side note, I saw that term mulatto when I was in West Africa written on buildings, and they did the same thing in West Africa. I come to find that they also did the same thing when they were in Senegal. They created a so-called buffer class between the Africans and the Europeans, and they called it Creole. I forgot the exact term they used, but the same confusion, same thing they did in South Africa, same thing they did in a lot of these Spanish-speaking countries to create confusion amongst the Africans and create division and more just insanity. So you look at the breakdown, you see there's all African regions in that DNA, and so people can't sit here and say, oh, you just from West Africa. Yes, primarily. Yes, that's the case. But there's also East Africa. And it's estimated only 5% of East Africans were shipped from East Africa to the Americas. So for it to come up in those kind of numbers is kind of interesting to me, right? It gets deeper. Nilo-Saharan, I talked about, they always say we don't have any connection to the Nile and, the people that are in Northeast Africa, but it's right there for you to see. And I don't know if this test is inaccurate or not, but I think something else is going to verify that as well. So let's move on. So what I'm showing you right now is something called the Ethiohelix Oracle 4, which it gives an approximation. If you have 4 ancestors and they all were, from a certain lineage, how would it break down to make who you are? So when I put in the Ethiohelix information to the Oracle 4, right, it breaks it down. Now they say that the higher the number, the further the distance is. So you see the approximate populations at the top. Then you see when it comes down to one population, you see those numbers are very high, 19%. It says 19.2 Kaba, or this Kameni. Those are people in modern day Chad and Cameroon, or Sarah. They call them the children of Ra. Keep that in mind. I'm talking about North Africa, children of Ra, Central Africa, Chad, Cameroon. Bamoun, also related to the Tikar, also related to the Tikar Bamoun people, current day Cameroon, who are stated to come from Sudan. I want to say they were called outsiders, and they were highly targeted in the transatlantic slave trade because they were considered outsiders. Now keep that in mind, because I'm going to keep going. Igbo, which I told you I found distant relatives who were Igbo. Hausa, I didn't find any distant relatives who was a Hausa. Congo, Fang, Yoruba, so on and so forth. Brong, which is people that are in current day Ghana. So I told you I found distant relatives who were that. Now we break it down to 2 populations. It says Bantu, South Africa, Mandinka, Brong 50%, Egypt 25%, Congo 25%. Now the digits are starting to get smaller, 7%. Now we break it down to 4 populations. Egypt, Hausa, 6.6%. Now those numbers are getting small. They say you get into the single digits, you getting too close on the money. Egypt, Hausa, Igbo, 6.6%. Egypt, Hausa, Igbo, 6.7%. Bamoun, Brong, Egypt, Hausa, 6.7%. Bamoun, Brong, Egypt, Igbo, 6.8%. Now, I think that it's an approximation that Egypt, I think that it's probably coming from something, or people that are in Sudan, or maybe it's coming from people that are currently in West Africa and have lineage that they trace to the Nile Valley. I'm going to attribute that to the Tikar and the Hausa, who are probably related somewhere along the line, because they both claim to come from Sudan, or modern day Sudan, because all of Africa was called Sudan at one time. Even Western Africa was called Sudan. So I'm just showing you that breakdown. You can look at it right there. Now, there's another test on here that I'm going to show you real quick called the DODECAD test. Now, the DODECAD test is very interesting, because this is where the numbers get even more funky. DODECAD version 3, I put my information in, and roughly the same numbers came up. Neo-African is the population they have, Mediterranean, Western European, Eastern European, West Asian. I think that's an approximation for probably Native American. East African came up again, Northwest African, and Paleo-African. Now, we look at the Oracle 4, just like I looked at for the Ethiohelix test with the French approximation for Eurasian populations. This is what comes up. The first thing that comes up, and the closest population I'm related to, is that ASW. That's African American Southwest. So 6.9%. That's what I am. I'm tech African American. As far as I know, our people were born here for several generations, and I can verify that. So that's correct. Kaba comes up. Those are people I talked about from Chad and Cameroon. People that they call the children of Ra, Sarah, Kameni. People that they said came from the Nile Valley and worshipped the sun and called it Ra. They call them children of Ra. They came up 11%. LWK, that's Luhuya people also in Kenya. People are Eastern Bantu. Hausa comes up again. Luhuya comes up again. Congo, Bamoun, Brong, Fang, Igbo, Mada, Nguni. So these different populations comes up, right? And the numbers get bigger and bigger as they go down. Now let's check out when we look at the 2 populations, African American, one ancestor. Kaba comes up 4.3. Now that's very small. That's pretty much like saying, okay, yeah, you're directly related to these people. 3 populations, it gets to 3.5%. Look what it says: African American, Bamoun, and Fulani, 3.5%. Now let's look at the 4 populations: African American, Bamoun, Fulani, 3.5%. African American, Fulani Congo, 3.6%. African American, Fang, and Fulani, 3.6%. African American, Yoruba, Fulani, Alur, 3.6%. And if you don't know, the Alur are the Nilotic people that live in Uganda currently. And I found a distant cousin in Uganda. Very interesting, right? So 3.6%. And I'll just say one last one. The YRI, Fulani, Alur, and another one, Fulani, Bambaran, Nguni, 3.7%. So the numbers are getting bigger, so it's saying there's more distance. But I'm saying all to say, these people keep coming up as far as people that have known to transverse the Sahara, people that have known to migrated from east to west, and people that currently live in Eastern Africa, such as the Alur, people that have migrated, such as the Fulani, people that said they migrated, such as the Bamoon, and my population, which is African Americans who currently live in North America, who were transported here via the transatlantic slave trade. So without getting too deep into it, so the last site that I plugged my information into was livingdna.com, and I found that site looking at other people's ancestry reveals, seeing which one was best, especially for so-called African Americans, people of the diaspora that were trying to trace their lineage, because it said it was more specific as far as groups. And sure enough, when I looked at the test, it gave me a very specific breakdown of the different cultural groups that we are said to come from. So when I took the test, and I plugged my information in, and I did it this year. I want to say a few weeks ago or a month ago or so, 2 months ago now. The first population that says 92% or 92.7% African, 90% West African, 90.4% West African, and the first population that pops up is, what do you know, Igbo. Second population that pops up is Benin. Now, it doesn't give a specific name, but I told you I found Yoruba cousins. I'm pretty sure there's probably some Fan in there, and I found Ewe cousins who are related to the Fan who migrated and are related to the Yoruba. So I'm pretty sure that's who that accounts for. But it also says Ivory Coast, Ghana, and these people also live in Ghana. I told you I found Ga, I found Ewe, I found Akan and Fanti, right? And that accounts for that Brong people who currently live in Ghana. Now, it breaks down, look at this, Tikar, the people that live in Cameroon, Congo, right? That comes down. Wolof, people that live in Senegambia. Masi, people that live in current modern day northern Ghana. And I want to say, not Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, landed up, right people, right? Masi, Mende, founders of the Mali Empire. Mandinka, also founders of the Mali Empire. Bamoon, who are related to the Tikar, right? Serer, who are the founders of some of the earliest West African medieval empires, Sanike, and that is Ghana, and also, Ghana, I want to say, and Cameroon Bantu, right? So East Africa pops up again, 2.3%, and European, we're not going to talk about, 7.3%, right? So I'm looking at these populations, and Tikar comes up, and like I told you, and all these people say that they came from Sudan, and people call them outsiders from Sudan. That's a primary reason why they were targeted. Now, so a real quick breakdown, because this is going to tie it all together. The transatlantic slave trade, a lot of people don't really know what happened, and we're still getting more information. I'm not going to sit here and act like I know everything that happened, but from what I've been researching and gathering, the fall of the Songhai Empire was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back that led to the softening, as to quote the Dr. Gerald Horn of West Africa, to make it viable for the transatlantic slave trade. Because prior to that, Eurasians were on the coast, and they were on the coast for 400 years, from the late 1400s, mid 1400s, until the 1800s, when they finally started to move in coast. And even still, they weren't able to move but so far inland. But the fall of the Songhai Empire with the Battle of Tombiti, 1591, it was what spurred the destruction of what we know as West African greatness. And ever since, we've been struggling to get back to that, because there was infighting. Number one, Askia Muhammad, who was called usurper. Askia means usurper, from Sunni Ali Burr, who was vilified by Islamic scholars. And there's a great writing called Tariq al-Sudan, The Time of Western Africa. He was vilified because he wasn't Islamic, and Askia Muhammad was, and he had multiple sons. I want to say dozens, if not hundreds, of children, and they were all infighting to become king. Even Askia was usurped by one of his children to become king. And I say that to say this caused a lot of political instability. And even with all the might and the power and the economic strength that they had many enemies. Morocco, which a lot of people like to glorify, and I'm not saying there was not great things about Morocco, became very greedy. They partnered with the Portuguese and the Spanish, and with only 4,000 soldiers and arms, they were able to topple the flailing and falling Songhai Empire that softened up West Africa, made people migrate towards the south, and there were already political laws in place where people in those medieval African empires were targeting people from towards the coast and shipping them to other places in Africa, as far as Morocco, even always as far as Baghdad and East Africa and so on and so forth. So they had slavery laws where they were enslaving these people, calling them infidels because they didn't practice Islam and things like that. So when the Songhai Empire fell, these people started migrating towards the coast. They said, oh, look what happened. You know, we got these Eurasians at the coast. They were saying, yeah, target those Muslims. But then when they targeted the Muslims were like, wait a minute, you can't trick us with this Christianity stuff because we are people of a book. And matter of fact, our book comes from your book, but we actually follow it better than you do. So, you know, you can't trick us with that. So they said, okay, you're people of a book. Target those heathens that don't have any book. And that's what caused a lot of infighting, religion, culture, and just outside forces playing on our differences to cause us to pretty much fight each other, enslave each other, even to the fact there was Muslim versus Muslim, because Morocco was a Muslim empire and so was Songhai, but they wanted their gold, they wanted their salt mines, they wanted the wealth that they accumulated. Even the knowledge that they accumulated. There was a popular scholar that was stolen. So I'm saying all this to say that there was a lot of political infighting. And that's just in West Africa. That's not even talking about East Africa or Southern Africa with a lot of the infighting. So I'll say all that to say, and even Central and Southern Africa, Central, East, and Western, the Western Southern coast, I want to say around Congo. Not southern, but central Congo, Angola, fighting the Portuguese and the Swedes, and them fighting each other, the Angolans versus the Congo, and so on and so forth. All this infighting is going on with these different cultural groups for religion, for money, for status. There's infighting amongst people for the throne, and Europeans on the coast just playing one side versus the other, getting one side guns, give other side guns, step back and watch them kill each other, as Tupac said, and just, you know, collecting the spoils of that conflict to our detriment at the end. So I'll say all of that to say that is what caused so many of our people to be stolen. So when people say they sold us, well, we can't really say that because we might come from a lineage that was selling each other. And 9 times out of 10 we do. Igbo and Yoruba didn't get along. I mean, there was even different Igbo groups. They had the Arrow Confederacy that were infighting other Igbos. So you can't say that one group was responsible for selling one group. You had the Fanti versus the Akan, and there's different Akan groups. You had the Ga versus the Ewe or the Ewe. You had the Mende versus the Fulani or Futa Jalon. I mean, there's so many different cultural groups in Africa that were fighting each other, and you add religion on top of that. You add outside influences, people fighting for cowrie shells and manila and gold and trinkets and umbrellas and guns, so on and so forth, and you have this big mess that we have. So I say all that to say that, number one, we can claim ties to all of these people on the continent, or at least I can claim ties to Western, Eastern, and as DNA evidence shows, those groups are all in the DNA. Even Northern Africa, the Nile Valley people, I can claim ties to all of them. The T-Car I told you about, and you could look it up for yourselves. These people say that they came from Sudan. Even the Hausa say that they migrated from Sudan. The Fulani say that they migrated from Northern Africa. The Ga say they migrated from Northern Africa. There's all kinds of correlations between the Yoruba and ancient Nile Valley civilizations. And also, this is the last thing I'll say. The Ga have a festival called Homoro, right? Now, Homoro is every August, and they say it's to correlate with the famine that happened years ago. And they say they migrated, like I said, from Nile Valley, and it correlates with the famine that they had. Now, mind you, this festival correlates with the rising, the heliacal rising of Sirius or Sopdet or the Sirius star, right? And I just said, wow, that's a hell of a coincidence that this festival, and y'all say y'all come from the Nile Valley, and y'all have this festival every year in August that correlates with the Sirius star rising above the horizon, or the dog days of summer, as they call them, which comes from what your Asians call the dog star or the Sirius star. And that's just, just one of many. And there's a book that I'm going to show at the end that talks about the mass migrations that happen. And I say all that to say as well is that people act like people just stay in one place. They say sub-Saharan, and that's a myth because they talk about the Sahara being green and lush thousands of years ago. And we know our people migrate whenever anything happens. I mean, we have forced migrations. We had the migrations in the United States when a lot of our people came from the south to the north, to the east, to central, trying to evade manufactured social and environmental hazards. So when our people were migrating because of famine, because of drought, because of animal migrations, because of wars, because of conflicts, because we know there were a lot of wars, especially in the Nile Valley. We can't sit here and act like our people don't have any ties to this land. I've just shown you with my own genetics that I can tie and I can claim all these places, and I don't sit here and claim I'm directly from ancient Kemet, and I don't sit here and dress up like I'm from the Nile Valley. Not knocking anybody that does, ancient Nile Valley, ancient Happy Valley. I don't knock anybody that does, but you can't sit here and claim we don't have a tie or a connection to that. I mean, it's in our blood, it's in our culture. And the last thing I'll say is my child, who I wanted to give a name from an ancient Kemetic or Tamari pantheon, right? I never told her anything about me going to Egypt or me, studying about ancient Kemet, right? She always asked me about ancient Egypt. She always said she want to go to Egypt. I want to go to Egypt. Can we go to Egypt when I get older? And I'll tell her, yes, we can. Where did she get this from? Why is she asking me about Egypt? Maybe her mother told her, maybe she didn't. But I'm saying all that to say there's a reverence, there's a glory that is tied to ancient Kemet. And I want to go to many of these places. I always wanted to go to Timbuktu. I say I want to learn Arabic so I can study the manuscripts there and just get more information. But I say all that to say we are connected to all of these people. So don't let anybody lie to you and tell you you're something you're not, especially if you don't know and they try to throw lies on you, claim that you're their permanent slaves and underclass. When no, we do have a glorious past. We can tie in all these places, and you can look at our culture and see how many things we draw from. It just comes out so naturally. And that's why people hate. That's why they really hate, because they can't put their thumb on where this glory comes from, but they know who they stole, and the whole world knows who they stole. You don't know who they stole, and that's the sad part. Well, with that said, I'm gonna end it there. I know this is kind of long, but give me your thoughts, feelings, rebuttals. I would love to. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and debate any of the Aboriginal folks, but I just find it silly. I'm not even going to entertain that stuff. You be what you want to be. If that works for you, thumbs up. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm a Pan-African person, literally walking. I mean, I've showed you I've had cousins from Gambia to Angola. Not Angola, Gambia to, I'm pretty sure there's probably some in Angola too, but Gambia to Kenya. So with that said, I'm gonna leave it at that. I thank y'all for listening. Until the next one, peace.